The year is 1969, April 24th. Somewhere in the jungle along the Cambodian border, Staff Sergeant Jerry Shriver crouches behind a fallen tree as bullets snap through the leaves above his head. The air smells like cordite and wet earth. Around him, his Montagnard teammates return fire into the tree line, their M16s cracking in short bursts. Shriver is not carrying an M16. Strapped to his thighs are two Colt .45 pistols in custom leather holsters. Across his chest hangs a sawed-off shotgun, the barrel cut down to barely legal length. In his hands is a suppressed M3 grease gun, a World War II relic that most soldiers wouldn't touch but that Shriver has modified and maintained himself. The weapon is ugly, utilitarian, and in his hands, absolutely lethal. He is 27 years old. He has been running classified missions into Laos and Cambodia for 3 years. He has been declared missing in action twice already, walking out of the jungle both times when everyone assumed he was dead. The Montagnard tribesmen who fight alongside him call him by a name that translates roughly to Spirit Warrior. The men at MACV-SOG headquarters in Kontum call him Mad Dog. Right now, approximately 200 North Vietnamese Army soldiers are closing in on his 12-man team from 3 sides. The landing zone they were supposed to extract from is overrun. Air support is 20 minutes out, and the radio operator is looking at Shriver with the expression of a man who knows he's about to die. Shriver keys his handset and speaks to the command aircraft circling somewhere above the jungle canopy. His voice is calm, almost amused. No, I've got 'em right where I want 'em, surrounded from the inside. If you're fascinated by the incredible true stories of special operations history and the warriors who operated behind enemy lines, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us bring more of these untold accounts to light. To understand who Jerry Shriver was and why his last words became legend among special operations forces, you have to understand what MACV-SOG was doing in Southeast Asia during the late 1960s. And more importantly, you have to understand the kind of man who volunteered for those missions. MACV-SOG stood for Military Assistance Command, Vietnam Studies and Observations Group. The bland bureaucratic name was intentional. It was designed to obscure the fact that SOG was the most classified American military unit of the Vietnam War, running operations that the United States government would not officially acknowledge for decades. SOG teams conducted reconnaissance missions deep inside Laos and Cambodia, countries that were officially neutral and where American ground forces were officially prohibited from operating. They captured enemy prisoners for interrogation. They tapped communications lines along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They called in airstrikes on supply convoys that the American public wasn't supposed to know existed. They assassinated North Vietnamese commanders in operations that remained classified until the 1990s. The casualty rates were staggering. SOG recon teams typically consisted of 2 or 3 American Green Berets, leading 8 to 10 indigenous soldiers, usually Montagnard tribesmen, from the Central Highlands or ethnic Chinese Nungs. These small units operated alone, sometimes for days at a time, in areas controlled by thousands of enemy soldiers. The average SOG operator survived 4 missions before being killed, wounded, or captured. The men who volunteered for SOG knew the odds. They knew that the missions were classified to the point where their families might never learn how they died. They knew that if they were captured in Laos or Cambodia, the United States government would deny their existence. They knew that rescue operations across the border were complicated by political considerations that had nothing to do with saving American lives. They volunteered anyway. Some were adrenaline junkies, addicted to the intensity of operating behind enemy lines. Some were idealists who believed in the mission. Some were simply men who had discovered that they were very good at violence and had found the one place in the military where that talent was not just tolerated but celebrated. Into this world stepped Jerry Michael Shriver, a young sergeant from rural Georgia who had arrived in Vietnam in 1966 looking for exactly the kind of war that SOG was fighting. Shriver was not a typical soldier. He was slight of build, maybe 145 pounds soaking wet, with a quiet demeanor that could shift into something else entirely when the shooting started. He had enlisted in the Army at 17, lying about his age to get in. He had volunteered for Special Forces, graduated near the top of his class, and then volunteered again for MACV-SOG when he learned about the classified missions across the border. What set Shriver apart wasn't his physical size or even his tactical skills, though both were formidable. It was his complete indifference to the normal rules of military behavior and his equally complete dedication to the Montagnard soldiers who served alongside him. The Montagnards were indigenous people of the Vietnamese highlands, ethnically and culturally distinct from the Vietnamese majority. They had been fighting outsiders for centuries, and they viewed the North Vietnamese government with deep suspicion. The American Special Forces recognized their value as jungle fighters and recruited them heavily for operations in Laos and Cambodia, where their knowledge of the terrain and their hatred of the communists made them invaluable. But the relationship between Americans and Montagnards was often transactional. The Americans provided weapons, training, and money. The Montagnards provided bodies for dangerous missions. When Montagnard soldiers died, they were replaced. The mathematics of counterinsurgency, Shriver refused to see it that way. He lived in the Montagnard village near the SOG compound rather than in the American barracks. He learned their language. He participated in their ceremonies. When a Montagnard soldier was wounded, Shriver personally carried him to the aid station. When one was killed, Shriver attended the funeral and sat in silence with the family. The tribesmen had never seen an American act this way. They responded with a loyalty that bordered on reverence. His weapon choices reflected his unconventional approach to warfare. While other SOG operators carried the standard M16 or CAR-15, Shriver assembled his own personal arsenal. The twin .45 pistols were his trademark, worn in custom quick-draw holsters like a gunfighter from an old western. The sawed-off shotgun was for close encounters, situations where the enemy was so near that aiming was irrelevant. The suppressed M3 grease gun was a relic that fired slowly but quietly, useful for eliminating sentries without alerting an entire enemy camp. Other soldiers thought he was crazy, hence the nickname. But the Montagnards who fought with him saw something different. They saw a warrior who had adopted their war as his own, who would die before abandoning them, who seemed to genuinely prefer their company to that of other Americans. In a conflict where many American soldiers viewed their indigenous allies as expendable assets, Shriver treated them as brothers. By 1969, Shriver had run more missions across the fence than almost anyone at MACV-SOG. He had been awarded the Silver Star, multiple Bronze Stars, and enough Purple Hearts that he stopped bothering to have them pinned on. He had been written off as dead twice, only to emerge from the jungle days later, sometimes carrying wounded Montagnards on his back. The North Vietnamese knew about him. Captured documents would later reveal that NVA commanders in the border regions had standing orders regarding the small American who led Montagnard teams. He was considered extremely dangerous, a priority target. There may have been a bounty on his head, though this has never been confirmed. On April the 24th, 1969, Shriver was leading a reconnaissance team on a mission designated Operation Ashtray, operating in an area of Cambodia known to be heavily trafficked by NVA units moving men and supplies down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The mission was supposed to be relatively straightforward: insert by helicopter, observe enemy activity for 24 to 48 hours, extract, and report. The Ho Chi Minh Trail wasn't a single path, but a network of roads and trails that snaked through the jungle, connecting North Vietnam to the battlefields of the South. Thousands of NVA soldiers and tons of supplies moved along these routes every week, protected by the fiction of Cambodian neutrality that prevented American ground forces from openly interdicting them. SOG teams were the only American units authorized to operate in this shadow war, and their mission was to watch, report, and occasionally kill. Shriver's team that day consisted of himself, 2 other Americans, and 9 Montagnard soldiers. They had worked together before. They trusted each other. They had survived missions that should have killed them all. This was supposed to be another routine operation in a war where nothing was routine. It went wrong almost immediately. Meanwhile, in the operations center at Kontum, the radio operators are tracking Shriver's team through periodic situation reports. The initial insertion went smoothly. The team moved to their observation point without contact. Then the reports started coming in differently. Enemy movement detected, team relocating, more enemy movement, request extraction. The operations officer on duty that day was a captain who had worked with Shriver before. He knew that Mad Dog almost never requested extraction. If Shriver was asking to come out, something was very wrong. The extraction helicopters were scrambled. Cobra gunships spooled up to provide cover, but the weather was deteriorating, and the extraction point was deep inside Cambodia, 40 minutes of flight time from Kontum. By the time the aircraft were airborne, Shriver's team was already in heavy contact. The NVA had found them, not a patrol or a random encounter, but what appeared to be a deliberate search operation. Enemy soldiers were moving through the jungle in a coordinated pattern, pushing toward the American team from multiple directions. Whether they had been specifically hunting for Shriver or had simply stumbled onto his unit remains unclear. What is clear is that within minutes, a 12-man reconnaissance team was surrounded by a force that outnumbered them by at least 10 to 1. Back in the jungle, Shriver is assessing the situation with the cold calculation that has kept him alive through dozens of missions like this one. His team has taken casualties. At least 3 of his Montagnards are wounded. The radio operator is functioning but terrified. The landing zone they had planned to use for extraction is now occupied by an NVA machine gun position. The enemy is close. He can hear their commanders shouting orders in Vietnamese, coordinating the assault. Muzzle flashes flicker through the vegetation. Grenades explode somewhere to his left. The perimeter is collapsing. A normal soldier in this situation would be thinking about survival, about finding a way out, about escape and evasion procedures drilled into him during training. But Shriver has never been a normal soldier. He is thinking about his Montagnards, about the men who followed him into Cambodia and are now dying around him, about the fact that if they try to run, the wounded will be left behind, and he knows exactly what the NVA does to captured indigenous soldiers. He makes his decision. Shriver hands his radio to one of the unwounded Montagnards and gives instructions. Get the wounded to the secondary extraction point half a kilometer to the east. He will create a diversion. He will buy them time. The Montagnard protests. He does not want to leave. None of them want to leave, but Shriver is their leader, and when he gives an order in that particular tone, they obey. This is when he makes the radio call that would become legend. The command aircraft overhead is asking for his status, asking if he needs assistance, asking the same questions that operations officers always ask when a team is in contact. Shriver's response cuts through the static with perfect clarity. No, I've got him right where I want him, surrounded from the inside. There is a pause on the radio. The operations officer isn't sure he heard correctly, but before he can respond, Shriver is already moving. Witnesses would later describe what happened next, piecing together accounts from the surviving Montagnards and from aerial observers who caught glimpses through the jungle canopy. Shriver left his position and advanced directly toward the heaviest enemy fire, not retreating, not evading, attacking. This was not suicidal, in the way that a desperate man might be suicidal. This was calculated violence, delivered with the precision of someone who had spent 3 years learning exactly how to kill in close jungle terrain. Shriver knew that the NVA expected Americans to retreat, to call for air support, to hunker down and wait for extraction. They did not expect a lone soldier to charge directly into their lines. He moved through the jungle like something out of a nightmare. The suppressed grease gun coughing rounds into NVA soldiers who never saw him coming. The M3 was not an accurate weapon at range, but in the close confines of triple canopy jungle, range didn't matter. Shriver was killing men at distances measured in feet, not yards. When the magazine ran dry, he transitioned to the shotgun, the short barrel devastating at close range. The sawed-off 12-gauge was a weapon of pure intimidation, designed for the kind of fighting where you could see the whites of your enemy's eyes. At contact distances, it didn't wound, it destroyed. When the shotgun was empty, the twin .45s came out, and he kept moving forward, kept killing, kept drawing enemy attention away from his retreating team. The NVA soldiers who tried to engage him found themselves facing a man who seemed immune to fear, who moved through the chaos of combat with a fluidity that suggested he had been doing this his entire life. The NVA responded by concentrating their forces against this single insane American who was charging into their positions alone. Shriver disappeared into the smoke of exploding grenades and the chaos of close combat. The sounds of firing reached a crescendo and then began to fade. The extraction helicopters arrived 20 minutes later. They pulled out 7 Montagnards, 3 of them wounded. Shriver was not among them. The surviving team members reported that he had ordered them to withdraw, that he had stayed behind to cover their retreat, that the last they had seen of him, he was moving toward the enemy, not away from them. Search and rescue operations were launched over the following days. Aircraft crisscrossed the area, looking for any signal that Shriver might have survived. Pilots flew low and slow over the contact site, hoping to spot a signal mirror or a panel marker, anything that would indicate Shriver was alive and evading. Ground teams attempted to reach the contact site, but were driven back by heavy enemy presence. The NVA had reinforced the area with additional troops, and it became clear that whatever had happened in that jungle, they did not want Americans finding out. Whether they were protecting a prisoner or concealing evidence of a death, nobody could say. The classified nature of the operation complicated everything. Shriver had officially never been in Cambodia. The mission had officially never happened. The normal mechanisms for tracking missing soldiers and pressuring enemy governments for information did not apply to men who had been conducting operations that the United States denied existed. Jerry Shriver was officially classified as missing in action. His body was never recovered. No definitive proof of his death was ever found. He simply vanished into the jungle that had been his home for 3 years, in the middle of a battle that he had chosen to fight alone. In the years that followed, rumors circulated through the special operations community. Some claimed Shriver had been captured and was being held in a prison camp in North Vietnam. Others said he had been killed and his body deliberately destroyed by the NVA to prevent recovery. There were even whispered stories that he had somehow survived, living deep in the jungle with a Montagnard tribe that had hidden him from both sides. None of these stories were ever confirmed. The official record simply says missing in action, and that is where it remains. What we do know is this. On April the 24th, 1969, a man who had spent 3 years fighting a war that officially did not exist made a choice. He could have tried to escape with his team. He could have used the chaos to slip away, to survive, to fight another day. Instead, he chose to buy time for his Montagnards with the only currency he had left. His final words were not a cry for help or a desperate plea for extraction. They were a joke. A dark, defiant statement that captured everything about who Jerry Shriver was. Surrounded by 200 enemy soldiers, about to undertake a one-man assault that he almost certainly knew would be his last, he found the absurdity in his situation and laughed at it. I've got him right where I want him, surrounded from the inside. There is a tradition in special operations of honoring those who have gone before at Fort Bragg, at Coronado, at the training camps where the next generation of special operators learn their craft. Instructors still tell the story of Mad Dog Shriver. They tell it not as a cautionary tale, but as an example of dedication beyond self-interest, of loyalty that transcends the instinct for self-preservation, of finding humor in the face of impossible odds. The Montagnards who survived that day never forgot him. Many of them continued fighting alongside American soldiers until the fall of Saigon, and some eventually immigrated to the United States. When they gathered in their new American homes, they would sometimes speak of the small man with the twin pistols who had lived in their village and died so that they could live. Shriver's remains were never found. The Vietnamese government, despite decades of cooperation on POW/MIA issues, has never provided a definitive account of what happened to him. The jungle he disappeared into has been searched multiple times, but the terrain is unforgiving, and 50 years of vegetation growth has buried whatever evidence might once have been recoverable. He was posthumously promoted to Sergeant First Class. He received additional awards for his actions on that final mission, but the decorations and the promotions are not why anyone remembers Jerry Shriver. They remember him because of what he chose to do when the choice came. Because when surrounded and outnumbered, facing certain death, he decided that his life was worth trading for the lives of his men. Because his last words were not a scream but a laugh. MACV-SOG was officially disbanded in 1972. Its records remained classified for decades. The missions that men like Shriver ran were not acknowledged by the United States government until long after the war had ended. They fought in silence, died in silence, and were buried in silence. The legacy of SOG and of men like Shriver would eventually be recognized. In 2001, MACV-SOG was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation, one of the highest honors a military unit can receive. The citation acknowledged, decades after the fact, the extraordinary courage and sacrifice of the men who had run missions across the fence into Laos and Cambodia. For many of them, the recognition came too late. They had died in jungles that the American government pretended they had never entered, fighting a war that officially did not exist. Their families had been told nothing, their sacrifices had been classified, but stories have a way of surviving. The men who served with Shriver told other men, who told other men, who told the recruits who would become the next generation of special operators. The story changed slightly with each telling, as stories do, but the core remained the same. A man surrounded from the inside, choosing to charge instead of run. Every year, on April 24th, there are those who pause to remember, not publicly, not officially, but in the quiet way that warriors remember their own. A toast raised in a bar at Fort Bragg. A moment of silence in a team room at the Special Warfare Center. The name spoken aloud among men who understand what it means. Jerry Shriver, Mad Dog, the man who had them right where he wanted them. His body was never recovered. His final moments were never witnessed by anyone who survived, but his last words echo through the decades, carried in the memories of those who came after, a defiant statement of everything that Special Operations tries to be. Surrounded from the inside, and still attacking. Some men die and are forgotten within a generation. Others die and become something larger than themselves. Jerry Shriver has been missing in action for over 50 years now, but in the community that he helped build, in the lineage of quiet professionals who run toward the sound of the guns, he has never really been gone. He is still out there somewhere, surrounded from the inside, exactly where he wanted to be.